Now what we're going to do, we've just done a slow read on Philippians 1. I want to show you how to make progress this year. I want to talk about something today that is immensely practical, particularly when your life feels like it's chaos, when it feels out of control, or you feel stuck. Okay? 1 Corinthians 9, you don't have to turn there, but there's a famous passage where Paul says, I don't run aimlessly, I run to win. You're a racer. That's progress language. Paul is actually saying life is like a race, and he's talking about pace, like I've got to have a pace that I can keep up. But then he's actually saying, but I want to find a way to actually move up in the pack. Progress. Okay? Right after that, also in 1 Corinthians 9, he says, I don't box as one beating the air. Boxing metaphor. Okay? The ancient Greeks and Romans boxed. Okay? But again, it's progress language. He understands that life is like a match, 15 rounds. You've got an opponent. Okay? You're going to get tired, so you need to land some blows and make your punches count. Or you're going to be gassed and you won't win. All right? Philippians chapter 2, which we haven't read yet, you could look ahead. It's right at the very end. Paul says, I am being poured out like a drink offering. And again, that is progress language. It means your life goes quickly. You're being poured out too. You and I need to make progress as well. And Philippians chapter 1 is actually going to show us how Paul makes progress, okay? How that happens. In other words, Paul gets anxious just like we do. He's in prison. That's his plight, okay? He's been sidelined. He's out of the race. And frankly, what it feels like right now for Paul is a pressure cooker. Somebody is Chelsea, mute. Chelsea or Gabe? I don't know how to mute her. There we go. Somebody, Jordan. There we go. Okay. This is what happens. Technology. Okay. Here's the point. Paul right now is in a pressure cooker, and you actually see that as he is working through the passage. He's been detained as a danger to society. Okay? Except instead of being detained by ICE, he's being detained by the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire doesn't deport you, they execute you. Okay? It's way simpler. All right? The Roman Empire made ICE look soft. Think about that. That's Paul's pressure cooker. And right in the middle of this pressure cooker, he starts writing letters to churches. This one's to the church in Philippi. And what's so interesting about this letter, particularly this chapter, is he talks about what he's facing, but you actually see him processing and making progress. And he gets to the point where he's like, I'm going to win either way. That's progress. Okay? Now listen, what I want to do is show you how to make progress with the pressure cooker in your life. Okay? Now, if you've been around here, you know that we often use what I call the universal outline. What's the story? Where's the gospel in the story? Okay, so what's the story? We dig into the text. Where's the gospel in the story? It's almost like we're miners and we're looking for nuggets of good news. And then when you find one, the last point is, well, where are you in the story? And you try to connect the dots and apply it. That's a great outline. But the problem is, oftentimes, you spend most of your time on those first 2 points, and the application is kind of just like little connections right at the end, and you have to go do the application. I want to flip the script today and say, we're actually going to just sit and kind of hover over Philippians chapter 1, and I want to spend almost all our time working on application. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to talk about my life, I'm going to talk about your life, I'm going to talk about Paul's life, I'm going to talk about the lives of others. So with my life, I'm going to show you how to take stock of your situation, just like Paul does. With your life, I'm going to show you how to focus your conversation. With Paul's life, I'm going to show you how you start to experience consolation. With the lives of others, I want to show you how to embrace incarnation. Does that make sense? My life, your life, Paul's life, the lives of others. But there's 4 things, really it applies to all 4 of those. But I want to emphasize situation, conversation, consolation, incarnation. Make sense? You ready to go? Okay, 4-minute intro. We got it. Let's do this. How do you take stock of your situation? I'm going to give you an example from my life. You ought to be doing this regularly, but at least once a year. In other words, you pause and you go, what are the pressure cookers in my life? Okay, pretty simple. We got a chance to do this past week. To those of you in the church who bought Marilyn and I a getaway to Lost Pines, thank you so much. It was really, really good. This is probably the first day off we've had since July. Okay? So, life has been so busy that by Friday afternoon, as we're getting ready to leave town, we get in the truck and I'm like, Marilyn, where are we going? She's like, I have no idea. I had to pull up Olivia's text where she's like, we're sending you to Lost Pines. I'm like, I think it's called Lost Pines. And we're like, where is it? I punch it in the phone. Bastrop. We start driving. Okay? Literally, that's how frantic our lives have been. Very little anticipation, sorry. Okay, it was a busy week. But listen, we got there, and it's kind of this resort right on the river. And Chelsea had told me there's all of this stuff that you can do. You can throw axes, you can ride bikes, you can ride horses, you can go canoeing, you can take a hike. You know what we did? Nothing. We sat there and like looked at the river and drank coffee, smoked our pipes, just kind of chilled, slept, ate, got up, drank coffee, looked at that is all we did. And I brought books along because I'm going to read. Didn't even touch the book. I brought my Bible along. I think I made it through 4 verses in a psalm. I tried to write some things down, and I'm just literally I have almost nothing written. And it wasn't because our brains were turned off. My brain is so full right now. And it wasn't until Sunday morning I actually woke up and thought, whoa, I finally feel awake. And I sat down in the sun with my cup of coffee and I said, God, I feel like there's 7 areas in my life that are just out of control right now. So you ready for them? I'm going to give them to you. This is what it looks like to diagnose your situation. Here's the first one. You guys know we have Lazarus. Well, we actually have 2 Lazarus. So the first one was Laz 2 on airport. Because basically, we're trying to stay alive. And I needed, this past 6 months, I have to figure out how to find enough. How do we squeeze enough, cut enough, save enough, and raise enough? We've got to raise a bunch of money to try to stay alive. That's a huge area in my life. Okay. Second thing, Laz 1, our first location. The lease expires in June. So we could lose that one. And we got to try to figure out, can we actually renew a lease that doesn't kill us? Because the landlord wants this much. So I've got 2 businesses, each one of those a major thing. And then we've got Laz 3, 4, and 5. And you're like, Laz 3, 4, and 5. Yes, we actually have people who are like, hey, we're interested in doing several more of these, and we need proposals and models and everything by January, February. Okay. So I've got Laz 1, Laz 2, Laz 3, 4, 5, if it ever happens. And then, number 4, the girls. All of a sudden, we've got 4 girls in our lives. And it's like, oh my goodness. How do we try to help these girls? Okay. Takes a little bit of time. Ben, you've been at the hospital a whole bunch. Okay, we've been talking. That has been really consuming. So there's 4 things. Fifth thing, All Souls, the church. Like I look at it and go, how do we get not just to clusters on a permanent basis, but how do we handle growth and how do we develop elders? Because we don't have that yet. That is a major, that's going to take some thought and some work, all right? So I've got 3 Lazaruses, the girls, plus All Souls. And then Marilyn and I bought a piece of property. This is number 6 back in Montana this summer. It's a piece of dirt that someday we'd like to have a cabin on. And I sit there and I'm like, how on earth are we ever going to have a cabin? So I think about that piece of dirt. And I'm like, I sure would like a cabin to go sit by the river in Montana and fish. How is that ever going to happen, Lord? I have no idea. But that's taking brain space. And then the last thing, 7th thing, I'm getting to the age where I'm starting to think about what do the next 10 years look like? What does it look like to transition away from Lazarus, away from All Souls, to pass the baton? I'd like to spend a little more time at the cabin that doesn't yet exist, fishing and also writing. And what does that look like? Okay, so do you see all the things in my mind? And you're like, how's Christian doing? And Marilyn's like, it's a little busy in there, okay? Now listen, here's what I want to say. There was something really helpful about just getting those 7 categories written down. I was like, oh, because my brain is just jumping all the time between all these different things. And it felt like God was like, let's put it down on paper, okay? And I actually wrote in my journal, Lord, would you please make these things clear to us? Would you guide our steps? Would you guard our hearts? Where do you want us to go the next 10 years, the next 5 years, this year? And when I get them written down, I can start to think through them. Now listen, so here's the first point. Take stock of your situation, okay? That's what Paul's doing in this passage, and that's what you ought to be doing in your lives as well, at least once a year. Nick.
Karen actually asked me on Thursday, what are your goals for this year? I'm like, I don't fucking know. That's actually a really good question.
Exactly. Okay, so Nick, you need to work on this. Listen, most of us go through the year, we make resolutions. Don't make resolutions. Actually figure out what are the big things that you need to figure out and make progress with this year. If I could make progress on just half of those 7 things, this would be an amazing year, right? Okay. So listen, the second point. What you're going to do is you start to list your situations. Okay, now we're transferring to you and your life. Okay, is you're going to say, well, what are your pressure cookers? And you're going to go through that first thing. But the goal is to get you into conversation. That's the second point. So situation, conversation. And let's just use an example. Where'd Esther go? Is she back there somewhere? I don't know where she went. Okay, I'm going to use Leah, all right, as an example. Okay, Leah. Now, I'm just guessing right here because I don't know everything that's going on in your life. But I could make a pretty good guess that if you were writing a list of pressure cooker things, one at the top would be your mom with the sickness, right? Okay. So if that was going on in your life, you'd probably be like, whew, I feel a lot of pressure there. Now you're also in school. Anybody who's in school probably feels pressure in school. And you're also probably thinking about the future. Okay, now, so there's 3 things. You might have a whole bunch more, you might have less, I don't know. But the point is, every single person, some of you guys, where's Kendi? Kendi, I know you're going through a lot of family stuff with your folks' health. Some of you guys have conflict in your family. Some of you guys have challenges and struggles at work. Okay? So here's what I want to say. Hopefully none of you have 7 things, because that is like a curse, all right, to have that many. But you probably have 2 or 3. And what would be really helpful is if you could put down those as categories, and then here's what you do once you, the goal is not just to like get the categories down, but it's to start talking to God about the categories. And this is what I mean by focusing the conversation. So I'm going to give you 7 questions. If you're taking notes, you should write this down. These are questions you can ask God about your categories. Okay? Lord, what do you need me to discern? Is there something you want me to figure out? Are you trying to show me something here? Discern. Okay? 2, what do you need me to decide? Are there places where I need to make some choices? Okay? 3, what do you need me to resolve? Sometimes you don't need to discern, and you don't need to decide. You actually need to just make commitments and keep them. Okay, so what do you need me to discern? What do you need me to decide? What do you need me to resolve? 4th one, what do you need me to learn and grow in? What are you trying to teach me? 5th, where do I need to repent and believe? To maybe turn and follow in a new direction. 6th, where do I need to obey and trust? Just take action. I need to obey Jesus and trust him with the results. 7, do you see what I'm doing there? Now, not every one of those is going to fit to every category, but the point is, if you start praying through your categories, asking those questions, Lord, what do you want me to discern? What do I need to decide? What do I need to resolve? Where do I need to learn and grow? You're going to start finding some areas that you can make some progress with. The last question, what is your growing sense of God's purpose and call in your life? Most people in America, and probably most people in this room, don't have a clear sense of God's call or purpose on their life. To actually start praying in the direction of like, Lord, how have you built me? Why? Like, what are you calling me to do? Malachi, were you going to say something?
I was just going to add one more that I've been praying a lot lately,
Yeah.
which is, what does it look like for me to walk in faith right now? What
Yeah.
does it look like for me to get out of the boat, so to speak? Today, this week,
Yeah.
what do you actually want me to walk? Where do you want me to walk in faith?
So there's your bonus question. What does it look like to take actually all of these have a
They all kind of
response.
fit in that, right? Yeah.
There's a response to all of these, which is, what does it look like to have faith that God's going to show you what you need, that he's going to help you make the choices, that he's going to help you keep your commitments, that he is going to teach you, that he's going to help you follow, he's going to help you take action, and there's actually going to be a purpose and call to your life. So the point is, you start working those questions against your situation, and what it does is it puts you into conversation with God. Instead of saying, God, I need you to do this, this, and this, you're actually asking questions of God. Asking questions of God is really helpful. You would be amazed at how many times when you start writing down questions for God, you start getting answers. Okay? Okay, all of these questions will help you unpack the pressure coolers, and they do it by putting you into conversation with God. So here's the third point. This is easy, right? So, situation, conversation. Okay, the third one, consolation. We're going to look at Paul's life. Now listen, what's consolation? Do you know, Leah? Any idea? Okay, you've heard the word probably. Anybody have any idea? What is consolation?
Comfort.
Comfort? Here's how I define it. It's a sense of comfort or relief in the face of adversity. That is not simply the removal of the adversity. Make sense? In other words, if you're in the trenches fighting in a battle and your buddy comes and is right there with you, the battle is still going on, but you feel some consolation because you're not alone. Okay? Paul, at the end of this passage, is still in prison, but he's actually experiencing some relief from the pressure cooker. That's what we're after, is how do you find consolation? How do you find comfort? How do you find relief in the midst of your adversity? So listen, let's think real quickly. What's Paul's situation? What are his pressure cookers? I'd say prison is probably one.
Is he going to die?
Is he going to die? Okay. Adversaries. He's actually got foes working to bring him down. Very few of you have somebody like at work that's like, no, I'm going to bring you down? Most of us don't face that. Sometimes it happens, but not like, whoo, big time. Third, he's also thinking about churches. That's why he's writing the letter to Philippi. Okay? And then he's thinking, this one's interesting. He's thinking about the soldiers, the guards to his cell. He's actually seeing them as an unexpected opportunity. Really interesting. Okay? Now listen, how does that focus his conversation? Well, what's fascinating is if you read through this passage, there is actually a lot of prayer language, okay, in it. There are mentions of prayer all over the passage, particularly in verses 3 through 11. And then what you get right down at the very end, look at verses 23 to 25. I'm hard pressed between the two options. My desire is to depart and be with Christ, for that is far better. But to remain in the flesh is more necessary on your account. Convinced of this, I know that I will remain and continue with you for all your progress and joy in the faith. He's actually getting to the consolation there. Okay? So, how does he get there? I want to give you 3 words. And again, you should write these down. Okay. Presence, participation, purpose. Presence, participation, purpose. Let me just say briefly about each one of these things. When I say presence, Leah, you mentioned this last night when you shared. You were saying we were talking with Malachi and Jordan, and it actually felt like God was there. That's what I mean by presence, where you feel like, oh my goodness, God's in the room. Now listen, you don't see that explicitly in this passage, but if you flip, you don't have to flip there, I'm going to flip there. At 2 Timothy 4:16, listen to what Paul says. He says, at my first defense, we're not sure if this is the first defense, but at least one of the times when Paul was in prison and on trial, it says, nobody came to stand by my side. They all deserted me. How would you feel how would I feel if this church got like broken up and I was on trial and you all were like, Christian? Christian who? We don't know who he is. Okay? Now, I would really love it if some of you would like maybe show up and be like, go Christian. Okay? Even in the gallery, like just a little wave. But the point is, Paul says, nobody showed up. Listen to what he says next. May it not be charged against them, for the Lord stood by me and strengthened me. See what I'm saying? He's actually saying he has experienced God's presence in the midst of the jail cell. Okay? There are places, I don't know if you remember this in the book of Acts, where Peter is imprisoned. Actually, it happens with Paul too. They're singing psalms, songs and hymns in the middle of the night. There's an earthquake that opens the jail cell. That's God's presence. Okay? So one of the things, as you start to pray this way, you're looking for those places where it feels like, oh my goodness, maybe God is in the room with me. I'm not alone. Okay? If I meet somebody who says, I'm never experiencing God's presence, and I don't really experience God's comfort, or I'm not finding much progress, one of the things I say is, tell me about your prayer life. And usually it doesn't look like this. My point is, if you start praying this way into your situation, asking God to show you, you are going to find His presence. He is going to meet you. So that's the first thing. The second thing is participation. There is a lot of participation language in this passage. Look at verse 5. Paul says, verse 4, always in every prayer of mine, making my prayer with joy because of your partnership. You hear the joy language and the partnership language? Your partnership in the gospel. Okay, from the first day until now. I'm sure of this. Why is he convinced? Why is he optimistic? Okay, that he who began a good work in you will bring it to completion at the day of Christ Jesus. It's right for me to feel this way about you because I hold you in my heart, for you are all partakers of grace. The point is, there's this language. Paul is getting comfort from the church at Philippi because they actually are sharing with him in the work. Do you have a sense of work? See what I'm saying? A sense of, okay, we're going to get to this last one, call and mission and purpose. All right? When you're in the pressure cooker and somebody comes alongside of you, you experience comfort. When you see someone in a pressure cooker and you come alongside them, they experience comfort. So one of the questions you can ask yourself is, who's God put alongside me that's in a pressure cooker right now? And what would it look to enter into their lives? That's what we're trying to do with the girls. We're trying to do with Babish. That's what we're trying to do with Belem. We are looking for people that are in pressure cookers and saying, how can we enter and come alongside them? Because if we can participate in their struggle, they will experience some comfort. So presence, participation, here's the last one, purpose. Most people, when you think about that list of your situations, most people don't look for divine purpose in their pressure cookers. Instead, what they say is, Lord, take it away. All right? Just give me relief. Or they shake their fist at heaven because he hasn't. This is why I could never believe in God. I hear people say that. What Paul says is he takes the pressure cooker and he finds purpose in his sufferings, which is why he can look at suffering as a gift. Down in verse 29, it's been granted to you, gifted to you, for the sake of Christ, that you should not only believe in him, but also suffer for his sake. Excuse me. So go back to that list of situations. Whatever yours are, think about mine for just a second. I actually have some pressure cookers that are relating to work right now. Okay? And I have some pressure cookers that are relating to family. Our family is expanding right now. And I have some pressure cookers that are relating to ministry, the church. And I have some pressure cookers that are relating to time. What are the next 1 year, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years looks like? Okay? Like my time is dwindling. I'm getting older. Okay. Those 4 areas, let me say them again. Work, family, ministry, and future. I'd be willing to bet most of the people in this room, hopefully you don't have enough pressure cookers that it fills all 4 of those categories, but a lot of people will only have a pressure cooker in one category. In other words, here's what I mean. You look at your work or you look at your family and you're like, that's my pressure cooker. Maybe I've got 2 of them. But you're not looking at ministry. You know why? Because you're like, I'm too busy. I've got all these other pressure. You're not actually thinking, maybe God has something for me in ministry. And here's what I want you to see. It's actually important to have your pressure cookers. You need to have multiple areas where you have a sense of God's call and purpose for you. All right? Work is one, your vocation. Now listen, here's what will start to make your work into a good kind of pressure cooker. Most people are doing their work. Who are they working for? Themselves. What are they working for? Money. Okay? Well, that's a very that'll give you pressure, but it's all about yourself. Now, one of the things that starts to change the way the pressure cooker works is when you say, I'm going to do my work as unto the Lord. What does it look like to work for the shalom of the city? What does it look like to work for what's good and true and just? Okay? Imagine for just a second that you are a federal worker in ICE. You're like an employee, and there is some crazy stuff going on, and you have to say, am I just going to keep my mouth shut and go with the flow? Or am I going to go, guys, this doesn't sound right? Now, that's going to create pressure, but it's a different kind of pressure. It's not from you seeking money or your career advancement. It's from you seeking what is good and right and true and pure. Okay? Now listen, family. Here's the second one. A lot of you have family pressure cookers. But do you know what's going to help and change that family pressure cooker? This is the biblical vision for family. It's not just your biological family. It's anybody that happens to be a neighbor in need. You invite them into your lives as family. And all of a sudden, it's going to create pressure, but it's a different kind of pressure. Let me give you a third example. Ministry. Most people in America are like, oh, ministry, that's for the pastors. The Bible says no. Ministry is for every single person. That's why God gives gifts to every single person. So if you start thinking, what has God given me gifts and how has He called me to help build this church? Now, here's what this will do for you. Okay? First of all, let me read my notes. Most people don't experience comfort in any of these areas because we tend to be seeking ourselves, work, family, stuff like that. So first and foremost, we need to be looking for those areas, all of those areas, as opportunities to serve, help, and spend yourself for others. When you do that, start to be other-oriented, you'll start to experience comfort. But here's the second thing. When you start to have a broad sense of purpose and call in all four of those areas, work, family, ministry, and kind of like future, what it does is one pressure will depressurize the others. Let me show you this. Okay, I'm experiencing pressure at Lazarus, right? Pressure cooker. If you had to come up with $500,000 so that 70 people don't lose their jobs, did you feel a little bit of pressure? You might. All right? So we just went through our Christmas season and we did the special 12 days of Christmas. And you know what? My staff dropped the ball on a bunch of dumb little things. And I was so like, so the first week after Christmas, I am like, we need to have a meeting. We keep dropping you hear that, like my angst? And guess what happens? All of a sudden, the girls and Babish drop into our lives. And do you know what that does? It puts perspective. I'm like, oh my gosh, I am so glad to enter into their struggle and suffering. And I look at work and I'm like, yeah, it's not that big of a deal. We need to do better. But guess what? It's not the end of do you see what I'm saying? By having those four areas, part of the reason your pressures dominate you so much is you don't have four areas. And when you have four areas and you experience struggle in your work, but you start to see the way that you can enter into suffering with others, it depressurizes the things that are big struggles for you. Malachi.
I think implicit in what you're saying, though, is this: you have to embrace that pressure is not a bad thing to escape from, right? And that God has a purpose behind it.
This is a great segue. Listen, none of this makes sense for Paul if he doesn't think that God is actually in control of suffering and allowing it to happen precisely because he's going to do something through it. For instance, in this example, what Paul does is he goes, guess what? I can't be planting churches. He's like sidelined, feeling pressure. So what does he start doing? Starts writing letters. You can thank God that Paul went to prison and wrote these letters, because that's what makes up most of our New Testament, right? If that hadn't happened, he probably wouldn't have written the letters. He just would have gone himself. Okay, so first of all. Second of all, when he's in prison, he's like, I don't know what's going on, but these soldiers, I'm having conversations with them. Okay? And the point is, he is constantly looking at what's going on, saying, you know what? Maybe God's doing something here. And when you start having that perspective about your suffering, instead of just how do I get out of it, it changes it. Okay. Here's the last thing, and I'm going to wrap up with this. Paul can find a sense of purpose in anything that happens because he understands that he's called to serve Jesus in everything that God gives. Now listen, here's the key. This is the fourth point. All right? This is how Paul embraces incarnation. What do I mean by incarnation? We enter in to somebody else's suffering. Paul enters in to all the people he ministers to their suffering, and he's calling the Philippians to enter into the exact same thing he's in. This is why he's saying it's been given to you not only to believe, but also to suffer. He's going, every single person has this incarnational call to enter into suffering for the sake of others. It's not just for the Pauls, it's not just for the pastor, it's for the entire church. And when the entire church starts to do that, churches start to change, people start to change, you start to change, and you will find and experience comfort and consolation and God's presence because you are actually participating in the work of Christ. All right? A big part of the reason why a lot of people in America aren't experiencing much comfort, consolation, and presence of God is because we avoid suffering like the plague instead of entering into it. And Paul is saying this is not how it should be. Paul's comfort in his plight, his consolation, it's not extraction from the pressure cooker, but rather it's presence, participation, purpose in it. And what that does is it makes you fearless. Like, I look at how are we going to navigate all this stuff with you guys and with Lazarus and with the church. I'm like, I don't know. But you know what? There's no place I'd rather be. I want to be in the midst of it with these guys and you guys and this city. This is a really good way to spend the rest of my life. And what I'm saying is, guys, if you can start to embrace that attitude, you will find the same kind of joy and the same kind of fulfillment. What Paul wants us to do here, is what he's doing. Situation, conversation, consolation, incarnation. And what I'm saying is, guys, start trying to do this at least once a year. Really, probably ought to do it once a month. But this is something far too few of us do. And it's what's actually woven through this whole chapter. Okay? If you do it, you'll make progress. You will be in a different place at this time next year. And that's really what I want to see for you. Like, I look ahead and go, no matter what happens this year, next year we are going to be in a different place. Maybe we won't have Laz 1. Okay. God's got a purpose in that. All right? It changes your perspective when you start to see that God is in control of suffering and he's going to use it. Doesn't mean suffering is good, but it means he can use it for good. Okay? God works all things for good for those who love the Lord. All right. Let's pray.